Dr. Samantha Nutt, our guest. Her new book is Damned Nations, Greed, Guns, Armies, and Aid, endorsed by Romeo Dallaire, Major General David Suzuki, Lloyd Axworthy, Kanon, Chantal Kreviazuk, I can never say it, the Singa.
Kreviazuk, yes.
Kreviazuk, yes. And they all say that if you read no other book, you must read this one to try and get an idea of what has changed in the last 10 years, what has shifted in contemporary war.
Well, one of the most significant things that's shifted is that we are living in a much more militarized world than we were prior to September 11th, 2001. Annual worldwide military spending is now $1.5 trillion, with the United States footing about half of that bill. That is the highest point after adjusting for inflation since World War II, much higher than it was during the Cold War. The sale of small arms, for example, is up by more than 60% since 2001 to $400 billion a year as an enterprise. And you know, we often think that war is a problem that's diminishing, but in fact it's very much continuing and in some places increasing as well.
And in contemporary war, often, as you point out, the people who die are civilians, 80% or something, civilians.
Absolutely, and that's something that has changed over the past 100 years, dramatically. It used to be 15% in World War I, and now it's 80% are civilians, mostly women and children.
Right. And so when President Bush said you are either with us or against us, much changed and continues to change. Is there hope in an NGO or an aid worker or a country? Let's go to the Congo for a moment. I know we sent 6 people or something. Canada sent 6 people to watch over the election.
Yeah, which was really
Not
unfortunate.
quite enough.
It was really unfortunate, especially because Canada has been very involved in the Congo. We have a very active mining sector, some of whom have been implicated in some pretty nasty things, and it's really unfortunate, you know, that we, especially because their movement towards democracy has been so challenging, that we haven't had a greater investment in our foreign policy from an aid perspective. So yeah, the Eastern Congo is a very challenging environment, but aid can work, and I see the effects of this all around the world, and I don't want to leave the impression that the book is all doom and gloom. It's a lot of hopefulness, I think, as well. I have seen remarkable people overcoming tremendous odds and inching forward and rebuilding their communities and moving towards peace, whether that's in Darfur, in Eastern Congo, where War Child's been on the ground for close to a decade, working on educational programs, keeping kids out of the militias, training teachers, getting girls into schools. Kids who 6, 7, 8 years ago would sit across from me and say that they couldn't read, couldn't write, and had no hope for the future, and were just waiting till they could be recruited again or to join the army. Now are graduating and have dreams of becoming doctors and lawyers. So it's imperfect. Aid is imperfect, and around the world there are a number of mistakes that are being made. But when we make those long-term commitments and investments in the right things, in education, in women and girls, in economic development, we do see change.
And when you have a mentality, however, that runs through, for instance, what happened in Cairo, when the men are saying to the women, go home, wash clothes, get married, get out of here.
Yeah. It's, you know, there is reason to be disillusioned in those circumstances, but having been on the ground and seeing the remarkable resiliency that exists and the courage, especially among women, and this is a book that really does, I think, address women's stories in a different way, because one of the things that I've been able to do over the years as a woman, as a doctor, is to get access to those stories of women. There's never a lack of inspiration, and women, despite tremendous odds, continue to champion for their rights and the rights of their children, and we need to continue to invest in that and create opportunities for them.
Very much. This book was spawned in part by you meeting a woman in a lineup who had a baby.
My entire humanitarian career, I think, began at that moment. I was working with UNICEF in Somalia in the mid-1990s. I was fresh out of medical school. I was working as a volunteer, and I was part of this large assessment that the UN was carrying out. And I would go to feeding clinics and interview women about their health concerns. And I can remember being in the middle of a conversation about 20 minutes in, talking to this woman, and I leaned forward and tried to put my finger in her baby's hand. She was swaddling her baby close to her, standing in this line. And the moment I did that, I realized that the baby was already dead. The hand was stiff and cold. And I just was shocked, and I was shocked by, here she was still hoping that something could be done for her child, not wanting to confront the truth. And recognizing that the child had been sick for many days. She had tried to come to the clinic sooner but couldn't because there were militia groups that were running throughout the streets and making her movements impossible, and she arrived too late. And for me, it really set me on a course to try to figure out what I could do. And the book captures those experiences.
Sure, and in structuring humanitarian programs that really work. War Child, the mandate, the essential mandate of War Child is?
We work in war-torn countries around the world with children and their families to address some of these structural deficits. We focus on education, on strengthening child rights and the rights of women, and on reducing poverty so that people, local communities on the ground, can be their own agents of change.
So today, if somebody in Vancouver, British Columbia wants to help, wants to reach out in some way, perhaps write a check, yes, that makes sense. But as you suggest in here, when you talked about blood minerals, for instance, in our cell phones we have minerals coming from countries where women are being raped and killed and all of that. But as you know and I know, people are not going to give up their cell phones.
No, and I don't advocate for that either. I'm not in favor of a cell phone boycott. The real key, especially when it comes to conflict resources, is figuring out how countries that are grappling with this issue can take advantage of their own wealth and use it in the right way instead of being caught in this cycle of violence. Well, the book has a whole chapter on what people can do and where they can go for information, but it's pretty simple. Ultimately, it's about taking the time to read or follow, even if it's one piece of international news each week, to make global thinking a part of our daily lives. The second piece is giving, and the third piece is socially responsible consumer and investment practices. And it begins by asking the questions. And more than anything else, I really hope that Damned Nations would introduce that conversation.
I thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you again. Dr. Samantha Nutt, Damned Nations, Greed, Guns, Armies, and Aid.